The idea of seeing a kid's face on a milk carton in current times is dated by today's standards. It's almost like a legend that people would have in their refrigerators cold containers of milk displaying images of children, many of whom had already been permanently lost. Nevertheless, these cases are anything but a fable tale, especially to those who still reside in or near the Midwestern town of Des Moines, Iowa. The practice of putting missing children pictures on milk cartons started with pamphlets used to spread the word about endangered little ones, until dairies began printing missing children images on their containers. The idea was, because many people consumed milk, it would ensure a means for a consumer to alert law enforcement so they could track down the responsible parties for kidnapping or murdering the adolescents who vanished. The first instance of a milk carton kid was 6-year-old Aiden Pates, who went missing in May of 1979, almost 44 years ago to date. He left his apartment in Soho intent on walking only a couple blocks to board a bus to school. It was his first time traveling anywhere alone, and he never made it to the bus. Nearly 33 years later to the day, 51-year-old Pedro Hernandez was inculpated in the crime and later confessed to killing him. Aiden Pates' body was never discovered. In the 1980s, the Missing Children Milk Carton program was created as a nationwide effort to try to bring home lost and captured kids around the United States. One of the last children to be seen on a milk carton was Molly Bish, a missing and subsequently murdered 16-year-old lifeguard whose case I recently touched on in the last episode of Creepify Mysteries. Because Amber Alerts were created and pediatricians feared children seeing the missing persons cartons could instill fear in kids who saw them, the program was dismantled and now Amber Alerts take place of the old practice. But the next 3 cases I'll be sharing today are some of the most prolific and terrifying cases of fated children who went missing without a trace, only to be seen again printed in black and white images that ended up in refrigerators across America. September 5th fell on a Sunday in 1982. A day when most other 12-year-old kids would choose to sleep in, but Johnny Ghosh didn't, and eerily enough, this late summer morning would be the last time anyone saw him alive. John David Ghosh was born on November 12, 1969, and even at his young age, he already had a job that required him to wake up during the pre-dawn hours. He worked delivering the Des Moines Register, the largest Iowan newspaper, ensuring other members of his community would have their publications delivered promptly. Although his father, John Sr., normally trailed along with his son on paper routes, this time Johnny only took his dog, a miniature dachshund named Gretchen, and his little red wagon in tow to carry his stack of periodicals with him. That day, he wore a Kim's Academy sweatshirt, which was a local Taekwondo class that was founded in Des Moines in 1970. Other Paperboys cited Johnny picking up his allotment of weeklies around 6 a.m., which was the last time a small group of people corroborated seeing him. Johnny Ghosh was trudging towards disaster when he started his route near 42nd Street and Marquardt Lane. Not long after, Johnny's parents, Noreen and John Ghosh Sr., began to receive phone calls from patrons along their son's route. While neighbors explained that they still hadn't received their papers, Johnny had most likely already been ensnared, sitting terrified in the vehicle, house, or somewhere unknown by a depraved person. Alarmed by the realization his boy was unaccounted for, John Sr. combed around his son's normal paper route during the twilight hours of dawn, but his search yielded no results. Noreen promptly called the police as her apprehension rose within her that her son may be in peril. Both parents knew this was not like Johnny. He was normally dependable and knew his paper route. The only evidence of Johnny Ghosh's artifacts that anyone found was his little red wagon used to haul his newspapers around. His mother called the West Des Moines police and stated they took at least 45 minutes to respond, which was, of course, a concern of hers. Adding to the frustration, she had to wait 72 hours to file a missing persons report for her child. Anyone who knows anything about a missing person case understands that even the hour after someone is unaccounted for is vital. People are often killed within the first day they're abducted. And in this particular case, officers simply postulated that Johnny ran away, a possible exclamation for their slow and lackadaisical response. When the kids who last saw Johnny Ghosh on that fateful Sunday morning were questioned, they shed light on disturbing events preceding his disappearance. A boy named John Rossi had a bad feeling when he saw a husky man in what was thought to be a late 70s model Ford Fairmount asking Johnny Ghosh for directions. Johnny even told John Rossi about the instance and asked John Rossi for help. He stated he'd seen the license plate but couldn't recall the numbers. He said he hoped to see it in a dream someday. Maybe it was stored in his subconscious and his mind would play it back for him eventually. After undergoing hypnotherapy, John was able to recollect several numbers of the license plate, which connected the car to Warren County, about a 40-minute drive southeast of West Des Moines. Mike, another paperboy who saw Johnny last, also credited John Rossi's account when he said he saw a man in a blue car who looked like he was following Johnny Ghosh. A third witness, a neighbor, heard the sound of a car door slamming and saw a silver-colored Ford Fairmount hastily driving north where Johnny's wagon was found. A year later, a woman in Tulsa, Oklahoma claimed that she saw two men giving chase to a young boy. After he was caught, he pleaded for help and screamed that his name was Johnny David Ghosh. Johnny Ghosh's case gained national recognition as he became the second unfortunate person to be placed on milk cartons that were printed across the United States. The terrifying circumstances surrounding his case unveiled the harsh reality that children were never truly safe, even if they were in the confines of the neighborhood in which they resided. In 1985, a woman in Sioux County, Iowa received a dollar bill during her everyday shopping activities at a grocery store. Written on the bill were the three powerful but simple words, "I am alive," and it was signed by Johnny Ghosh. 3 separate handwriting experts confirmed the signature did match Johnny's, but authorities never discovered his location. His parents, Noreen and John Sr., divorced in 1993. It's very common for parents who survive the loss of a child to deal with painful ensuing marital problems, and this case is no exception. About 15 years later, in 1997, Noreen Ghosh reported a late-night visit from Johnny at 2:30 a.m. She said her son was accompanied by another unknown man. She said her son had fallen victim to a pedophile ring and changed his identity, grew his hair out, and dyed it darker to disguise himself. She reported that he even showed his mother an identifiable birthmark, thus cementing credibility with her. Her ex-husband John Sr. and police did not believe the account to be a viable one and suspected someone was playing an awful trick on Noreen. Over the years, random photographs of a bound boy that bore a striking resemblance to Johnny ended up on Noreen's doorstep. Criminals confessed to taking part in Johnny's abduction, and people told the Ghoshes they could get Johnny back in exchange for money being sent. But police assured everyone that these were all scams or people who were toying with the emotions of the vulnerable parents. In the end, Johnny Ghosh never returned home and no one ever paid for abducting and most likely murdering the young boy. But because of the valorous work of his mother, a landmark bill was passed in 1984, which forced police to report missing children immediately instead of forcing parents to sit idly by while their loved ones succumbed to unknown dangers. Not even 2 full years after the Johnny Ghosh kidnapping, another paperboy who handed out the Des Moines Register went missing. While both crimes did not take place in the same neighborhood, it's nearly impossible to ignore the strikingly sinister and chronological occurrences. Eugene Wade Martin was born on August 17, 1970, and went missing on August 12, 1984, just 5 days before his 14th birthday. Gene, as his family and friends called him, even had plans for the big day to pick out a new bike with his father, and he was also excited for the Iowa State Fair, which had recently come to town. He hadn't even lived out a full year as a teenager when he woke up during the pre-dawn late summer hours on that Sunday to begin his paper route. Though his older stepbrother normally accompanied Eugene, dressed in a gray and white striped shirt with red sleeves and blue jeans, this day he went out alone as he left the safety of his home around 5 in the morning to collect his papers. He was allegedly seen having a father and son type discussion with an inconspicuous looking, clean shaven man in his 30s to 40s with brown hair between 5 o'clock and 5:15 a.m. near the quaint and innocent looking suburban homes at Southwest 12th Street and Highview Drive. There were no reports that Eugene looked in duress, and it was noted that the two talked amiably. This fact about the investigation begs the question: did he possibly know his abductor? Is it possible he had prior conversed with the man, or was the man just non-threatening enough in nature to the point where Eugene didn't have to have his guard up? Nevertheless, as was similar in the case of Johnny Ghosh, neighbors along Gene Martin's paper route began to phone in complaints that they still hadn't received their issue of the Des Moines Register. At approximately 7:15 a.m., his route manager telephoned the boy's family to explain that Eugene hadn't picked up his sack of periodicals from the juncture of Southwest 14th and Highview Drive, a mere half-mile walk away from where he was seen talking to the suspected kidnapper. A woman had called the supervisor to let him know she still hadn't received the paper and wanted to know if she could pick one up from the pile left on the corner of the street. Eugene's father called the police 15 minutes later after a second phone call from the route manager that let the parents know the papers were still untouched. Eugene Wade Martin was neither seen nor heard from again and remains missing to this day. Authorities believe the man who kidnapped Eugene and possibly Johnny is a loner who either feels ridden with guilt because of his crimes or walks freely with an unscathed conscience. But either way, he will not come forward to confess his crimes. That is why it remains of the utmost importance that anyone who knows something about these cases come forward, so the remaining family members can have some peace of mind. Johnny Ghosh's parents are still living without closure. Eugene Martin's mother and father sadly passed away without answers, but he still has relatives living that question what happened to their loved one. The two missing Paperboys of Des Moines are some of the most well-known cases, but that just scratches the surface of the baleful events involving young teenagers and preteens in 1980s central Iowa. It was the day before Easter Sunday, less than 2 years after Gene Martin's disappearance on March 29, 1986, when Mark James Warren Allen of Des Moines let his mother know that he was going to hang out with a friend down the road on Southwest Emma Avenue. He told his mother to save him some pizza for when he got home later, waved goodbye from outside, and never arrived to his friend's house. The next morning, when the boy's mother, Nancy Allen, realized her son wasn't home, she immediately called her mother and Mark's friends to ask if he was at any of their residences. After all of them replied that they hadn't seen her son, Nancy got authorities involved. But despite her best and constant efforts, Mark never came home. He was originally, erroneously, reported to have been another paperboy like Eugene Martin and Johnny Ghosh, but this was incorrect. But still, another young boy between the age of 12 and 13 was missing in the same area of Iowa under suspicious circumstances. As cases began to pile on, the pressure to solve the missing children's cases ramped up as family and friends of the lost ones longed for answers that would never come. Unlike the two prior cases, there were no witness statements about Mark talking with an older man or the sighting of a car. For all intents and purposes, he had disappeared into thin air. Nancy said she called the police, but they refused to help her, stating that a child needed to be missing for 48 hours until they were willing to step in. As was common in other cases, police simply assumed the kid had run away, and it wasn't a pressing or urgent matter. It would appear that they were unaware of the new bill passed in Johnny Ghosh's name, where law enforcement needed to act immediately when a child was missing or endangered. 48 hours came and went, and soon years passed by with no information on Mark Allen. What's more, from 1986 to 1989, there were 4 more cases of young boys, 3 of whom delivered papers for the Des Moines Register, and 1 who delivered papers for another company 20 minutes away, evaded attacks from men who were described similarly to the man who was last seen talking to Johnny Ghosh and Eugene Martin. These are just reported cases. It is a fact that many people do not report assault, and many men and boys are afraid to say anything about it for fear of not being believed or because they're just embarrassed. And because of this revelation, there begs two disturbing questions. Was there a single serial child predator in the 80s who targeted young males that delivered papers in central Iowa? Or were there multiple predators in the 80s who were targeting young males delivering papers in central Iowa? There's a ton of information about these cases if you do enough digging on the internet. Some variables in any of them changes depending on who the sources are, but the fact remains true that the disturbing loss of Mark Allen, Eugene Martin, and Johnny Ghosh left a giant hole in the hearts of a community where they were supposed to be safe, and permanently changed the lives of those who loved them.